This is going to be a massive clickbait here, but basically, I've got something that's been on my mind while consuming media for years, really, and I'm just going to bite the bullet and try to explain it once and for all. So I watched that Marvel show, Miss Marvel, and I'm lying. I'm lying to you. See, I watched maybe 7 minutes of episode 1 of Miss Marvel, and I was bored, and I clicked off, and I have never touched it again. This is not a review of Miss Marvel. I really haven't seen it, but I do have a lot to say about media in general and why I think I stopped watching it. For one, I have no great respect for Marvel properties, in recent years especially. Twitter has really made me aware of Marvel bros in a way I never wanted to know about. The only time I've cursed acquired knowledge in my existence, and Marvel has just been getting worse over time. It's insanely oversaturated, but it's also just taking itself for granted. It has the trappings of a property that's overconfident, too big to fail, too used to success that it forgets how it achieved that success. Shang-Chi is the only Phase 4 thing that I've kind of liked so far. Loki is the only other thing I've even finished. This isn't a video about Marvel either, but the point is, I go into Miss Marvel with low expectations. I don't know what to think of it. I haven't really seen people that I trust talking about it yet. I just watched the beginning, and I can tell that there's some thoughts being put in some ways. You've got the noticeable animation and editing and filming ideas in use, and they really scream that this is extra effort in cinematography and presentation, that it's trying to compensate for something. It feels like it's in response to criticism of the bland way that Marvel stuff is usually shot. Or it feels like it's trying to be quirky and maybe even artsy and try all these things that other Marvel stuff usually doesn't do. Now this fascinates me purely because of how I find this off-putting, even though I can't tell if it's good or bad. Let me put this into perspective. Everything else I saw in those 7 minutes that I watched was just more generic Marvel whatever. Normal, like, lacking in robustness, lackluster, standardized way of trying to make characters feel cute and quirky, but it just comes across as formulaic, weak humor, weak story hooks, with a feeling of overconfidence in the intrigue of their still relatively formulaic, like Kamala's home life. It feels like it's overconfident, like it's just presenting a Muslim family is supposed to be this incredible hook, like the most wild, insane thing a TV show has ever done. And then just doing that and saying, hey, we're a Muslim family is enough to warrant a hook. Like, they don't feel like that making the story or dynamics actually interesting. It's overconfident in that sense. It has all the weak energy of some generic Marvel take it or leave it nothing burger, like normal, you know? Like what we've been getting for a while. So, the only thing that really stands out to me is the cinematography. It's the only thing that doesn't feel like other typical formulaic Marvel stuff. The potential problem is exactly that. Exactly that. It's weird because a breakaway from formula still somehow feels like formula. The cinematography and integration of animation doesn't feel like every other Marvel thing, and it doesn't feel like formula, so it feels obvious, I guess? It's kind of hard to describe, especially since it sounds like I'm criticizing the show for having this extra thought and ideas put into the presentation. And maybe I am, but I don't know. It just doesn't feel organic or interesting. I look at all the animated stuff and I thought to myself, oh, that's how they're trying to add spice. They're trying to throw in this shit to, like, distract from the fundamental lacklusterness of everything. Like they're trying this shit. Like, they're like, oh, we recognize that we're mediocre, and so we're gonna try this shit. You know, it's kind of like how advertising is less effective on you when you know that you're being advertised to. The cinematography did not attract me to the show. It just stuck out to me like a sore thumb because it was so obviously something that they were trying to do to contradict their normal MO to try to score some cinematography points. Beyond that, I don't think what I saw really managed to achieve the stuff that good cinematography wants to achieve. I mean, what do you want your shots to do in a movie or a TV show or whatever? What do you want? You want stuff to look cool. You want stuff to look visually cool. You want stuff to be aesthetically pretty or otherwise satisfying in some way. You want cool shots. You want shots and editing with good energy and pacing. You want to flow with the story. You want action that fucking slaps ass and is fun to look at. You want shots that feel like they have hidden meaning. Shots with intrigue or add ambiguity to the audio-visual experience. You want all that shit, or maybe it's just some. The problem is, a fucking Marvel thing can't really have that ambiguity, that ambiguous cinematography. They can't have shots that feel compelling or like they have hidden abstract meaning or like they're artsy, because Marvel stories are not ambiguous at all. They're the most cut and dry grade schooler ass stories on TV. So, with all this extra effort put into trying to make interesting cinematography, does it succeed at any of these things? Are the shots actually on their own as full shots? Are they cool to look at? Are they aesthetically satisfying? Or do I look at the screen and feel like really satisfied by what I'm seeing and like have this desire to just keep watching the audiovisual experience? I really don't think so. I think that most of the animation or edits they added to try to spice things up visually just kind of stand out as misguided attempts to add cinematography and complexity, but I don't think any of them actually look very good or achieve any of those things. Like, maybe, this specific animated thing is, like, well animated, or it's, like, cute or whatever, but it's placed in, like, this tiny portion of the screen, and it's poorly framed, and it's not really the focal point, and it just vaguely exists in this one shot, and it's not balanced in the whole shot, and the shot as a whole, as a result, does not look particularly powerful or cool. It just exists. It's just something that I recognize, but it's not appealing. It just has that shit in the shot, and that's all. The overall package has not been improved by these additions. Just looking at something with very similar ideas for a presentation in a vacuum, right? Mitchell's versus the Machines. Mitchell's is a beautiful looking film that fully incorporates all of its animation and makes every fucking shot look stunning and flow well, and not just have these awkward little animation shittles, limply flop on the screen every once in a while. So is this extra effort in the presentation and the style, per se, better than normal Marvel drab, boring presentation with gray, static shots that do nothing? Well, it's complicated. I don't know, man. The thing is, this is the thing I find fascinating. I can watch something that sucks much easier than I can watch something that is mediocre, a lot of the time. See, in media consumption, there's a degree of familiarity. Sure, when you consume the same thing over and over, you get bored of it. That's gonna happen eventually. But at the same time, when you're familiar with something, it's much easier to turn your brain off and just soak it in than would be the case for something weird that you're not used to. Something, fresh or new or whatever. Fresh is the wrong word, because that implies positivity. This isn't the same as, like, genericness or originality or novelty, per se. Something can be generic as fuck, but still not feel comfortable to you. There's this weird brain trick that happens. If you have nothing to pay attention to, if your brain is going on autopilot, in terms of media consumption, your brain is doing the Skinner box loop, like they talk about in video games. You're responding to a given stimuli with a given response. You're in low power mode, essentially. When you go into high power mode, you're more aware of yourself and your surroundings. You're less brain dead. And as a result, you require more stimulation. You also lack the addictive quality of Skinner box consumption, of continuously consuming those comfortable, familial tropes and patterns and how things usually are and how they predictably are. For example, for me, watching the distinctly not Marvel cinematography of the first 7 minutes of Ms. Marvel, I was paying attention. I was not in low power mode. Unfortunately, if it had just been in a more generic, drab, normal Marvel popcorn crap with just, like, comfortable shit that I've gotten used to and nothing to grab my attention or distract me at all, I could have coasted by on low power mode. But precisely because they tried to do something different and it was distracting, because they had something that wasn't familiar, wasn't autopilot, I feel like I got bored way faster than I normally would have because I was on full alert. I was seeking stimulation, I was seeking intrigue, and I was not getting it. It was nowhere near enough to satisfy me, this new weird presentation, animation shit they were trying. This is the phenomenon I think I could talk about for hours without really understanding it or explaining it any better than this. How something more tropey and more standardized can be less boring than something more unique, or at least something that is trying to be more unique. Even stuff that's really great content, if it's not tropey, if it's not comfortable, if it doesn't fit into your Skinner box addictions of what you're used to in media and storytelling, if it actually challenges you to like think and pay attention, it can still get boring faster than shittier but more easily watchable content. So again, I have to wonder, is this bad? Is it bad content from Ms. Marvel? That they tried to do something to respond to a genuine criticism of their usual cinematography, and they still wound up lackluster. Is it just calling attention to itself? Or is the perspective shifted and it actually is better than normal, boring Marvel shop composition, but it's just hard to judge because the whole package is overall mediocre? I don't know. My point is, you've got to think about Skinner boxing your content if you're a content creator. You have to balance familiarity and ease of consumption with your fresh ideas. Take like a really catchy ass fucking pop song, the catchiest beat, like any good song from the 70s that will still play on the radio today. Even if you've heard it a million times, even if it's not the top thing on your mind when you think of like your favorite songs, amazing music, it is fucking catchy, and you can listen to it and vibe with it all fucking day. Near the end of my incredibly long video on FF7R's storytelling, I talk about this concept a lot, and in that I used an old Digi comparison and called this type of material the junk food of media. Junk food is addictive. You want it. Maybe it's not the best thing for you, maybe you know that, but it just tastes good. Sometimes it's easy to eat, sometimes you just want it, it's a familiar flavor. I think that writers need to keep that in mind. Writers and directors and whatever, that they want to make something, especially something trying to be different, trying to have fresh ideas of any kind, trying to get themselves out of a slump or out of a comfortability, because that is essentially what it is. They are trying to get out of their comfort zone of just making boring, drab bullshit cinematography. So, you know, you need to make sure the pill is easy to swallow, is what I'm saying. You should structure your material with the flavor of junk food. You know, you want your content to be easily consumable without too much effort or forcing yourself through your awareness of your own boredom. You want it to go down easily. You want people to just be mildly satisfied and comfortable just sitting on the couch staring at the screen, to simply be catchy and satisfying to the base urges of content. Catchy pop music is satisfying. If you don't make your content catchy, it needs to be a fucking masterpiece to make up for it. Because you don't have your audience in that comfortable daze where they're just feeling pretty relaxing, you know, when they are not sated with that junk food flavor, when they are alert and looking for content to enjoy, looking for some appeal to satiate them. If your content isn't well and above to par, if it's just kind of meh, people feel that a lot more than if your content was more generic, but it was at least catchy with its in its base tropey ways that content can be. Anyways, yes, that was my review of the first 7 minutes of Ms. Marvel. Thank you. I'll be here all week, don't mind me. I mean, I wasn't even going to watch Ms. Marvel in the first place. I didn't bother trying with Falcon and a bunch of other Marvel shit recently. I can just sense the bullshit and boringness way too quickly now, as they've gotten more dull and less satisfying. You might think it's unfair to judge that in the first 7 minutes... But it is unfair to judge in just 7 minutes a whole show, and I'm not saying that I have an opinion on the whole show, obviously, but again, citing Digi, a different Digi video, ever the wealth of useful and unique media analysis insights, there's another video, an older video, about how to spot the subtle tells that something is good or bad very quickly by examining the first episode of 2 shows. There's the first episode of Steins Gate, which has a notoriously boring first episode to an otherwise phenomenal show, and the first episode of Gate, a notoriously exciting episode to an otherwise or overall mediocre show. Now, to someone who has trained their bullshitometers long enough and are sensitive enough to the subtle writing and directional form, I assure you, we can tell when something actually has weight and density behind it, or when something is shallow and mediocre and bad. I can watch 7 minutes of Ms. Marvel and get the vibe of the overall directorial style, the lack of energy, the lack of building anything of interest in that time to start accumulating value for the future, and the next 7 minutes after that, how every moment feels like you're waiting for it to hit the predictable marks that you're expecting, and move on, instead of it waiting for you to absorb all the rich information presentation they're building up. You can just tell when there is not much going on under the surface, and there almost certainly won't be in the future. You can tell when the style and presentation lacks satisfaction, lacks building any sort of investment or nuance, believable empathy where you can get invested in the predictable emotional vats from characters, because they're so shameless as the cardboard cutouts they are, with the stiff writing that doesn't feel human or natural. It lacks anything to get you attached in any way to the fiction. Anyways, I only even tried watching Ms. Marvel because I like her powers in the comics. I wanted to see big, stretchy, Luffy-ass fisticuffs, but from what I've seen from people online, the show doesn't even really do that at all. So I feel like I wasn't missing much. That's about it. See ya.